Well, back. Police have stormed a protest camp set up by anti-greed protesters outside the Reserve Bank in Sydney. They'd wanted to stay there until later this week as part of the worldwide Occupy movement. Similar protests have turned violent elsewhere during the night, particularly in Rome. Joining me here in the studio in Sydney, Occupy activist Josh Lees. Good morning to you, Josh.
G'day.
And from our US Bureau, 7 News correspondent Angela Cox. Morning, Ange. Now, I'll start with you, Josh. What did police say as they moved in to move you on?
They actually said nothing. They gave us no warning whatsoever. They refused to talk to our police liaisons. They just started moving in and tearing down, tents, but not just tents. It wasn't just that they were taking down tents. They took people's sleeping bags, sleeping mats.
Well, they confiscated those items?
Yeah, they pulled up a big yellow truck and started just throwing everything in.
Just looking at the footage we were running during the news before, there was an officer saying that it was okay to be there in protest. It wasn't okay to camp there. Did you get that message from them at any point?
Kind of after they'd already started throwing things in a big truck, I think we started to get that message, and we did end up staying, of course. And I'd urge everyone watching to get down here to Martin Place,
yes,
to join our protest. But
now, Josh, a lot of people who are watching the show and have been watching the news the last few nights will have seen the protests, and they will have a vague idea of what the protests are about. It is a reaction to the the enormous financial encumbrances that have been foisted upon us by Wall Street bankers and the like. What are the specific aims of the Occupy movement?
Well, like you said, we've been united around a few broad aims to say that we want a world based on human need, not corporate greed, that we're sick of the 1% at the top of society, dominating our entire political and economic system. Like you say, the economic crisis, what's their so-called solution to it? Just bail themselves out, throw more money at the people who caused the crisis, while at the same time attacking the working class, attacking the poor.
Well, there's no doubt that governments have socialised the debts of the big banks whilst continuing to, allow them to capitalise the profits. What do you do about it?
Well, what we're calling for here, obviously this is just the start of something which needs to be much bigger, but what we're calling for is a total transformation of the entire way our society works, so that instead of just being dominated by the profits and the interests of that 1% at the top, it should be about the mass of humanity. The 99%, as we're saying, should get to run the world. We should have something like a real democracy, not what we have now, where the two major parties just end up serving that 1% as well.
Ange, over to you. A global day of protests which started there in the US has turned violent in Europe, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right. We've seen protests in London and Frankfurt, in Hong Kong and, of course, around here in the US, but things turned pretty ugly in Rome. We saw police having to use tear gas and water cannons. Those pictures are pretty dramatic. It seems as though a small group of pretty violent protesters broke away from the main demonstration. They were smashing shop fronts, they were smashing car windows, setting cars alight. 2 news crews were assaulted. They were burning the Italian flag. So a lot of anger there, but it's not really typical of what we've seen from these protests. We have seen a few skirmishes between police and protests around the US, but certainly nothing this dramatic and violent so far.
From what I understand, the organisers of the Occupy movement in Italy have denounced that violence, but organisers worldwide have vowed that this is definitely not over, Ange.
Yeah, that's right. The heart of this movement is obviously New York, and they're celebrating after yesterday there was talk the owners of the park where they've been occupying for the past month had tried to evict them. At the 11th hour they said, OK, you can stay after pressure from political leaders. But certainly they're saying that this is far from over. And social commentators are saying the longer this protest goes on, the more legitimate it becomes. And it's certainly interesting to see how there's been a change in the way people see this protest. To begin with, many people, parts of the media sort of saw it as a group of hippies or professional protesters who are making a lot of noise but didn't really have a clear agenda. But certainly as it's continued, we've seen everyday Americans, older women, older men, blue-collar workers coming out. They've lost their job, they're frustrated with the situation and they're coming out. So certainly people here, the media and politicians are taking it a bit more seriously. US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton even said, this ought to be a reminder to politicians about how they've got a lot of work to do to, meet the expectations of the American public.
Good on you, Ange. Thank you. Josh, we have to leave it here, but very quickly, are you finding in Australia also that you're being joined by a very mainstream a group of protesters at the moment?
Absolutely. Yesterday we were joined by firefighters, by people from the MUA, teachers, construction workers, because all these sections of the union movement of others are under attack. Here in New South Wales, of course, the Liberal government is waging an attack on public sector workers, and so we've got the backing of lots of those unionists, and we need to build a much bigger movement. So once again, I'd urge everyone to get down to their nearest occupation, in whatever city you're in, major city, it's happening. Get down there, and you'll be able to be part of something pretty inspiring, I think.
Well, I think most people would agree that it's a little unfair that 95% of the wealth is controlled by 1% of people. Next question is, how can we change it? All right, Josh, thank you for joining us.
The questions we'll be answering.
Over to you, Sammy.